Welcome to this training on the Extension Program Specialist Career Ladder System. For those of you that may not know me, I'm Courtney Dodd, and I serve as the Associate Director for Health, Families, and Youth. And I'm definitely not going to be doing this training alone. We have a group of program specialists that have helped put this together and that you will hear from today. So you won't just be hearing my perspective or information that I have to share, but from a great group of program specialists who have previously served on our agency review committee and also have had success in the Extension Program Specialist Career Ladder promotion process. And so I'm happy that they are all joining us today as well. And so the goal for today is really to share with you more about the career ladder, the process, the timeline, and what to expect. Real quick, just an outline for the training today. Again, as we are going to go through the guidelines, requirements, and timeline, we're going to talk very specifically about the performance domains, which is really what you will use to outline your achievement report for promotion and give you recommendations for your promotion packet for when you decide to apply for promotion, and then again have time for some questions and answers. And so the first thing I want to do is make sure that all of you know where to find this information. So if you go to the Extension Employee website, which is at the top of this slide, extensionemployees.tamu.edu, you will click on resources. You won't necessarily click on the drop-down menu, but you'll click on the word resources, and that is going to take you to a screen of more information, which is really a long list of information. You are going to scroll down until you see jobs and careers in extension, and you'll want to expand that. There will be a little plus sign by it, and then this is what's going to come up. And I apologize if that's a little small, but you'll see career ladders, and then in that list, you will see Extension Program Specialist. That's where you will go to access the career ladder guidelines for Extension Program Specialist. So it's right here. It's a packet of information. So if you have not ever looked at that or taken a look at that document, I would encourage you to do so, to take the time to read it and to become familiar with it. It might create more questions for you, but we're definitely here to help you, as well as your supervisor, answer those questions and provide clarification for you. So you can find that there. If at any time you have trouble finding that or accessing it, just let us know and we're happy to help. So a quick overview just about the Extension Program Specialist Career Ladder process is really what we want to do in this career ladder is make sure that it reflects what your contribution is to Extension, the value that you bring to Extension, which you all do. And so it's important to know that the success, your success in the promotion process is based upon the advancement of your knowledge and your ability to apply different principles and practices. We want you to demonstrate impact, basically. That is what is so critical for promotion at any level, whether you're applying for a 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to senior. We want you to be able to show that you are making impact in your work. And it's important too that if you look at the document, there's standards of achievement that we want to see at each level in the career ladder. So if you're applying to promote from a 1 to a 2, there's standards of achievement that you should follow. Those standards you should be achieving at the level of 2 in order to be promoted. But they are also flexible enough to accommodate the wide range of job responsibilities that we all have. We have a lot of different extension program specialists that are in different units that work in different program areas, and you all have a wide array of duties and different job descriptions. And so I hope that you'll see that those standards of achievement are flexible enough to accommodate all those varying job descriptions and the roles that each of you play. So it's important to note that the work each of you do in your specific role, while it is very different, it all supports the mission of AgriLife Extension, and that's what's important too. And so as an extension program specialist, you should continuously advance in your respective field. And I think you'll hear me say more than once today too, that even though each of your jobs is very different, what is so important is that you always go back to that position description, making sure that that's accurate and up to date. And we rely on your supervisors, your unit leader or your associate department head to make sure that that is up to date, because that's something that's taken into account too. And I will say that more than once today, as I said. So it's important too for you to know the different levels within the extension program specialist ranks. So we have level 1, 2, 3, and then senior extension program specialists. So there are 4 levels. Not all, but most come in at a level 1, and then you have the opportunity to advance through these levels throughout your career. So that's what we are looking at, is you should know what level you're at, and so be thinking about when you promote, you know, what's that next level you're promoting to. So when you look at the document and the guidelines and see those standards of achievement, you know which ones you need to be focusing on. So to dig more into the career ladder promotion process, this slide outlines the basis for your evaluation. So what the committee will look at, what will be considered in the evaluation of you and your work for promotion. The first thing is your position description. Again, it is so important that that's up to date and reflects your job responsibilities and expectations. And so we really recommend that be reviewed every year. At performance review time is a great time to do that, for supervisors to have conversations with their employees about, is this still up to date? Is it reflective of what you're doing? And so, but because that is one item that you'll have to include in your promotion packet. So make sure it's up to date. The second one is the Cumulative Program Specialist Achievement Report. From here on out, I'll just refer to that as your achievement report. We'll get into more of the details in a minute of what to include in this achievement report, but I will say right now that it's so important to keep this document up to date. Whether you do that on a monthly basis, twice a year, at the end of each year, or maybe you have a supervisor that requires you to update this every year for your performance evaluation, which some may groan at, but then you'll be so appreciative that you've been made to keep it up to date, because trying to backtrack, 5 years to create this report will be somewhat of a challenge. So it's so important to keep the document up to date. And the last basis for evaluation is really documentation of success in each performance domain. We want you to we want to show that you're meeting or exceeding those standards of achievement, which again are outlined in great detail in the promotion packet and further explained there. So we're going to go into more of the performance domains, and as we do this, I am going to give like the highlights, kind of the meat and potatoes, what should be included in each of those performance domains, that hopefully will help you understand what to include in this section. And then we're going to hear from others, and contributors here who, like I said, have served on previously served on the agency review committee that can provide even more perspective about what should be included in each of these performance domains. And these performance domains will serve as the outline for your achievement report. So you'll notice too that they also align with the performance domains of your annual performance evaluation. So hopefully you'll see that all these things align, and that makes it just a little bit easier. So we'll start with the program development and implementation. And so for this performance domain, the information that we want included here is, excuse me, this section really encompasses all the priorities related to your work as an extension program specialist. So whether those things are assigned or self-initiated, it's really, this section is about the planning that you do, the developing that you do, the delivering of content that you do, implementing those extension programs. And so it includes all that program delivery, you know, development and distribution of educational materials, demonstrating the use of new technology and programming. And then it also includes those planning activities. As a program specialist, working with county extension agents, maybe working with boards and committees, it may be working with volunteers, other faculty in teaching and research, industry, all those things you can read on the slide. And it also includes planning activities that may be excuse me, clientele focused education and training of volunteers, as I mentioned. So we want to see the planning that's being done and the delivery of programs that's being done in this section. Again, it can look very different for each, from one extension program specialist to another, just depending upon your specific job expectations and responsibilities as outlined in that position description. So I'm going to pause there to see if there are anything from any of our committee members that y'all would like to add.
One thing, Courtney, that I'd like to bring up. Hi, I'm Andy Crocker. One thing that I'd like to bring up is don't let program development throw you, especially at the early levels of the career ladder. Adoption and adaptation of existing programming is absolutely what you should be doing. I mean, if you start out developing a brand new program, that's fantastic. But if you're taking and modifying, augmenting, implementing, customizing existing extension programs, that is no less an important task, and needs to be documented in that way. But also be careful about the language that you use. So when you adapt or adopt a program or you customize it for a specific audience, use that language rather than using the word developed, because developed kind of has a specific connotation. And so that's my thought here.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, you know, I think just remember that developed, you know, implies that you created it. And you may not have created it, but you may be implementing or adapting a program, maybe for specific needs or specific clientele in your program area. One thing you'll see as you go through the different levels is kind of increase expectations on program development. And like, for instance, on technology, you know, level 1 is utilize and adapt, but, you know, level 2 is more novel and innovative application of technology. And so, you know, showing that you're not only using in-person programming, but things that you're doing, particularly during COVID, that a lot of us have had to develop different technologies and things that we would do for program delivery. That's really important, you know, to include. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Lisa Whittlesey. So anyway, but I know there are some others on our committee that may have some general comments related to this.
I was just going to say words do matter. I know it sounds kind of goofy, but when you're writing your paragraphs or writing your bullet items, do think about the words you are using. As Andy and Lisa both said, you know, it is scholarly maturity, but it's also, we understand everybody does things differently, but it's how you word things that everybody needs to see so that we know what you're really doing. Don't assume we know anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would add, this is Dean McCorkle. here, I would add that this also includes publications, which could be an extension publication, could be something in a, farm press or other type of magazine, could be a journal article. And some people, depending on what their job description is, do a lot of that. Some people don't do much of it. But if that's something that you've got quite a bit of, kind of get familiar with how to cite that and report that in your packet.
I will add that the committee typically on the agency level that is tasked with reviewing these packets, we come from really diverse backgrounds. So, I'm in horticulture, Dean is in ag economics, Andy's in family and community health, Janet's in entomology. I mean, really broad backgrounds. And all of our disciplines, there may be acronyms that we use related to certain programs that may be only familiar to those that work within that discipline. So, if you're working on Walk Across Texas, for example, and you put WAT, people may not be familiar what WAT is. And so having kind of a brief description on what that is and maybe how your program fits into that larger picture is important. We use a lot of acronyms within our agency, and just understand that, write it as if the person that's reading it has no clue what you do. Because in some instances, you may be working in a very different discipline or area than others are, and it just adds a lot of clarity to your packet to have that.
Thank you all so much for that additional input. Really appreciate it. The next section is outcomes of programs, and this is where the section where you'll include what those outcomes of all those programs you just told us about, what was the impact of those? What was, what did the evaluation say? So in this section, that's where you're going to include that, what are those measures? What were the measures? What was the outcome, and documenting those? Was it knowledge gained? Was it skills gained? Was it attitudes changed? Practices and behaviors adopted or changed? And so that's what we want to see here. And again, as you progress through the levels of the Extension Program Specialist career ladder, there's greater expectations. In the beginning, it may be that you're utilizing the evaluation feedback for your own teaching effectiveness, and then progressing to show have the evaluations show the true impact of the program. And so, we would want to see probably more practices and behavior change if you're applying for a senior level, if you're applying for promotion to obtain that senior level status, senior extension program specialist, versus if you're moving from a 1 to a 2. So again, in this section is where you'll include all of that evaluation data, summarizing the outcome of the programs that you're leading. So any committee members have anything to share here?
Hi, this is Andy again. So I think this is where your job description or your position description is important, because many of us may not have front-facing roles within the agency, and so there may not be a lot of opportunity maybe to interact with clientele, to see the work that's being done with our programs and evaluate that directly. But this is also where, building value with county extension agents or volunteers or whoever's implementing your program, to let them know that the evaluation is important, that you need this data back. You use it to help refine the program. You don't have to be completely altruistic. You can also say that you need it for your promotion. We'll call that impure altruism. But the other thing is, because of the work that we all do is so different, help us know what an outcome of your program looks like. There are narrative sections. So in my work, there are a lot of programs that county extension agents do, and they feed the data back to me, and I'm able to do that. But maybe your work is more one-on-one with a producer, and I run thousands of people through a program annually, but you only talk to 17 people, but those 17 people, it's months-long interactions that you track them across something. Again, no less valuable, but help all of us who do different things in different ways understand that that really is what the outcome of your work looks like.
Yeah, and I would add that this is probably the performance domain where people struggle the most with, and tend to be a little bit weak. And I guess what I'm referring to is lacking basic information, you know, like how many people attended the program, how many did you administer the evaluation to, what was the response rate, etc. So really it's just basic information that's, I think, should be easy to include, but a lot of time gets overlooked and left out.
I agree. And just some things that I thought of is, one is if you're doing a program, for instance, I'll use my program as an example. I work with the Junior Master Gardener program. We do lots of teacher and volunteer training. Well, we have some standard evaluation tools that I utilize for all of those teacher training programs because they're very similar. And because of that, I am able to aggregate that data across the different training programs that I do. So that's helpful. So if you could create or utilize a standard evaluation, maybe for some of your programs, I think you would find that to be helpful. And including things like, you know, basic, and I don't want to get into statistics, but an N. I mean, we need to know how many people were doing that. And if you can include some relevance and response and impact, what type of survey did you do? Was it a pre-post? Was it a retrospective post-test? Those kinds of things. And particularly as you go up through the system, they're going to want to see more of those types of things. I will tell you, Paul Pope could not be on this call, but Paul works in organizational development, and he is helping to put together just kind of some tips and guidelines to help you with this outcome area. And I think he's going to provide that to Dr. Dodd and team to review, and we'll be able to make that available to you. And I think that you will find that to be helpful as you go through this process. And then also, you don't have to do evaluation all on your own, okay? So you may be doing a program like Andy mentioned with county extension agents. That could be something that all of you are working on together. And so it may not be you creating and developing the entire evaluation, but it may be an evaluation platform that all of you all are using to be able to document impact.
We'll move on. All good points. Thank you all for sharing. And I do agree that that resource that Paul Pope is developing is going to be very handy. I envision that it'll have kind of outline a lot of those things that the committee members shared, like what is your N, you know, what was your response rate to your evaluation, things like that, making sure you include all those details so that the review committee knows, you know, can see all that information, which definitely helps in the evaluation.
And so also, I was just going to mention, sometimes you may have outcome like quotes, right? Or impact statements. And those are valuable things that you can put in as well. Particularly some of you that may be working with the 4-H and youth development program, you may get impact statements from parents or from children that participated in your program. And certainly that shouldn't be maybe the only type of evaluation that you do, but you know, I think it's nice to include some of that too, that's more you know, qualitative and maybe not just driven by, you know, a survey response.
Definitely. Okay, the next performance domain is faculty, staff training and assistance. And again, your position description should indicate, you know, the expectation of your position to help meet faculty and staff training needs. So If you're unclear of what those expectations are, it's definitely worth having a conversation with your supervisor, referring to your position description and seeing what it says. But in this section, we want to see the work that you're doing to help others with an extension, that you're planning, that you're providing content, and conducting training for others. So whether that's for county extension agents or other people. And so this could also be the development of just resources for agents, for example, or development of curriculum for them. It could be a presentation at a professional development program, or something that you develop for self-study. Maybe it's an online course for agents that would, outside clientele could utilize the online course too, I guess, but it's something that they could do on their own. So it's all those things. And obviously we want to see progression here too. In the beginning of your career, you might be contributing to training that others are putting together and serving as that resource for agents. Whereas you might progress to, you're able to identify what the needs are and develop that training program, take more leadership, I guess, of the development of that training program for agents. And obviously this is something too, as an extension program specialist, that you'll likely work with RPLs on. Not to get into the weeds on that, but a lot of times they will know too what the agent's needs are and work with you to help maybe plan that training for others. And so that's just an example. So this is where you're providing that training and assistance. Sometimes it's also contributing to newsletters and websites and blogs and giving that information in other ways. It's not just standing up in front of the room or being in front of a computer screen. So there's a variety of ways to do that training and assistance and support people in their work. So with that said, I'll see what the committee also has to share from their perspective.
So I'll go first, because one of the things especially you guys might want to think about, and again, faculty and staff training and assistance varies from discipline to discipline. Again, me being in IPM and entomology, a lot of what I do with county agents is support them with, CEU programs or Master Gardener or things like that. This is part of that as well. But it could also be if you're doing a lot of answering of questions for your county agents. I mean, I'm thinking back a couple of years, but when we first went into COVID lockdown, there was also this thing called the giant Asian hornet, AKA the murder hornet. But I mean, we were doing a lot of fielding of questions and stuff. But I mean, if you're doing stuff like that, some of it you may measure, some of it you may not, but do put this in here in this section, because again, based on your job description, that may be what you're doing more, whereas our different Andy over here, he does more training with the agent. So what we're really trying to figure out when you're filling this section out is, how are you supporting the agency in any function?
Yeah, to Janet's point, so the first line in my job description is support county programs. And so this is where, I would, as a reviewer, if I were looking at my materials, I would look to see program development, outcomes, and then also faculty, staff training, and assistance, because those are probably the main ways that we support county programs. Your job description may be different. I will say, though, that professional development among our colleagues is very important, helping them understand your subject matter, what you do and how you do it, and how you can help them. And so, look at opportunities. And again, as Janet said, it may range from a phone call to standing up in front of a room and doing a training. The thing that I would point out with this is evaluation is a key component of this area as well, to show your effectiveness as an educator and as a trainer. And so if you look at the career ladder guidance, it does include, feedback in this domain. And so don't overlook that when you're cataloging trainings that you've done. If there have been opportunities even for just a simple 5-question Likert scale evaluation, Don't overlook that because it is important. And the thing that we might overlook in the title of the achievement report, it is a cumulative, whatever the rest of the words are, but cumulative is the first word. And so what can happen is you have an entire career and you've not done this, and so then you want to go from 3 to senior, but this is a big hole in your materials because you know that we didn't start off that way. So do be familiar with the guidance in each of these domains and pay attention. And as I think Lisa pointed out, you don't have to evaluate everything you do. I don't evaluate everything I do. There are some key programs that I, kind of track and follow. But, it's important to have something.
Mhm.
And Emmy, I saw your question and I have thoughts on that, but we'll come back to that at the end. So don't worry.
I think that your evaluation you do related to training, showing maybe how you were able to utilize that to better adapt your trainings, right? To better meet the needs of the agents that you might be serving. And of course, Dr. Dodd mentioned train the trainer resources, and so did Janet Hurley. Those are things, whether it's a workshop kit, if it's PowerPoint training presentations, really helping agents to be able to deliver quality programs at the county level, and then also helping give the materials, maybe responding to an emerging need, okay, whether it's, Janet gave the example of the insect that was a problem. In horticulture, sometimes we have emerging needs related to insects or invasive species or things like that. So being able to get that information out so that we can disseminate it is really an important part of this session as well.
Okay, the next section then is support of extension activities. And there's a lot of things that go into this. Mostly the financial, material, human resource support, right? We're talking about grants, contracts, participation fees, sponsorships that you might facilitate for a program, and also those linkages with other agencies and industry. And so fee-based programs is something that we're all familiar with in extension. So even, what fee-based program support are you providing? Fees that you're bringing in, money you're bringing in by charging that participation fee to come to a program that you're leading. So that is, that's a lot of information because we get into, like grants and contracts that you might have here, sponsorships again, and you can even do, I think some do in-kind sponsorships too. They might list in this section. But then there's a few other things here too. You can see on the screen that the guidelines say that you can include in here. And I'll just pick out a couple things like responsiveness to administrative requests. You might be asked to help with a special project. And so it's important to include that here and show how you're responsive, maybe summarize that, or internal and external committees that you were asked to serve on. Be sure to include that here as well so that they can see how you're supporting the agency through various activities. And obviously, as you progress through the career ladder ranks for an extension program specialist, in the very beginning, you might be a part of a grant. As you progress through the career ladder, you're leading, you've established, relationships with other industry or organizations, and you're leading the efforts to submit a grant application and facilitating that whole process, serving as the PI. So you'll see there could be a progression there as well in supporting extension activities. So I'll turn it over to the committee for what they may have to offer here.
I would say, and we'll probably say this many times this morning, it's always a good idea to try to find somebody, whether it's a coworker or someone else in another unit who's been through this process, I'd say at least once. So they've got a good packet, and you can get some good ideas on how to report stuff. So, things like contracts and grants, you're going to want to show who is that funding from, maybe what's the title of the grant, what's the, how many dollars was it, of course, what's the time frame, and what was your role, whether you were, PI, co-PI, or whatever, just so it's easy for the people on the committee that are reviewing it to know what that grant was and what your role was or is.
Committee members, can y'all also share from your perspective, should they, when they're putting their packet together, show all, like, let's take grants, for example, all the grants that they've submitted, that they've applied for, and then indicate whether those are awarded? Do y'all like to see that from your perspective?
So I do, and I'm just one person, but I think it's important because it shows effort. It shows that you're trying. I mean, they call them competitive grants for a reason. We don't expect all proposals to be successful, and so it is a good kind of track record, and it's just a good policy to show your work. To show successful and unsuccessful. To Dean's point, though, about your role, I think that's an important thing that kind of runs through this packet. This is about you and your professional advancement. And so it really is important for the committee members, whether it's a program developed, adapted, adopted, whatever, the outcome of it, the faculty, staff, training and assistance, or here supportive and extension activities, to really clarify your role, because this is about you. And if you're part of a team, great. Tell us what your part of the team was. Were you a leader? Were you a member? If you were working solo, great. Tell us that. And that's going to be really important. The point that I have to make here is about a grant. Grants are it means something to get a grant. It means something to be a PI. It means something to be a co-PI, something like that. It is no less important to report participant fees, donations, sponsorships, in-kind support, things like that. But be very careful about calling yourself a PI on something that isn't a grant. And that's my thing with that. So I do a lot of grants. I know Lisa does a lot of grants. I don't hold out my hand very much to have someone just sponsor something I'm doing or to give me a donation. And so that to me is a really important skill set that you have as a professional. This isn't all about just grants and contracts. It's about how you're supporting the agency. And so don't discount whatever you've got to contribute to this section. Even if it's just a bunch of in-kind donations that help support your program, that is a significant thing. So don't get caught up in if you've not been successful with grants.
Yeah, and I want to speak a little bit to that, just because I know some people that is really not a part of their job, is really grant development. I mean, it is for mine, and I do a lot of it. Andy does a lot of it, but some of you that may not be a part of what you do. I do want to talk a little bit about volunteers. Some of you, your work may involve volunteer training, okay? There's a dollar value of volunteer service to our agency, and that would be a really important thing that you could include. If you're training volunteers and they've donated X number of hours to your program, there's a dollar value affiliated with that. I know Jayla Fry for the Texas Master Gardener program looks at it statewide on how many hours of volunteer services agents do across the state. So, some of you may be doing that with, oh, Laura, thank you, $28.54 per volunteer hour. So if you're working with 4-H adult leaders that are helping with program implementation in your county, or Master Gardener volunteers, or Master Wellness volunteers, or whatever that is, those are really good things to be able to use. I know some in ag economics, and Dean, you can talk a little bit more to this. Y'all may be developing programs that have a savings or an economic impact to to the consumer. So Dean, you may share a little bit more on that side, or health implications, and a dollar value related to that.
Yeah. For anybody that's working, in the health area, or well, actually anywhere, ag, FCH, and if if you've got questions about trying to measure an economic benefit of what you're doing, send me an email, call me, whatever. I would love to work with you on that. There's a lot of that we've already done. So we've got economic benefits of various things. So it's just a matter of talking to you and trying to figure out how we can apply that to what you're doing, and also how you might want to report that in your packet. But yeah, absolutely would love to talk to you.
Dean's an ag economist. Take advantage of that.
I'm free.
They can help you to know maybe how to word that and how to present that in a way that is really meaningful and adds meaning to the work that you're doing. And again, the tables and your role is really important, and we'll talk about this in other domains as well, but having it presented in a way that it's very easy to follow, it's very easy to understand what you did, what your role is, the number of people impacted, whether it was county, state, regional, international, those kinds of things just really help to provide a better picture for those that are reviewing those packets.
All excellent points. I really appreciate those ideas and suggestions there. And just a couple of things I would say, if you're ever curious of what that value of volunteer time is, I know it was shared here, but Laura Hebinger is the person to call. And you can always just send her an email and ask her, because that changes every year. And so it's good to stay in touch with her, and she can always provide that for you. And I loved the points that were shared about it's not just about grants, right? And in the guidelines, it specifically says, too, that funds supporting 4-H programs and contests can be included here, as well as recognition of cooperators and volunteer leaders. So that value of volunteer time and is definitely important to include. So just a few other examples that were mentioned. I appreciate that. Okay, the next performance domain is coordination and cooperation. And so this is really, we know that this can be impacted by your defined area or your responsibilities, right? If you are assigned to a district or a region, if you are your program specialist position is made possible because of a specific funding source. If you're a part of a grant, if you're funded on a grant, or again, if it's just your position description, that is all going to outline the expectations for coordination and cooperation. But what we want to see in this section is that you are working with others, whether that's internally and externally. We want to see that communication, coordination, and teamwork. So that's what is looked for in this section. And so you can see a list here that's working with agents, maybe working with RPLs. I mentioned that previously when we were talking about training, district administrators, other departments and units, and even other people within your specific unit. And then externally, other agencies and organizations. So it's showing how you are working with others internally and externally. So committee, y'all might have some suggestions on the best way to do that.
So again, I think this goes back to your position description and what you tell us or what it tells us you're actually doing. I mean, if your job is about multi-state grant projects, things like that, we're going to want to see that reflected in coordination and cooperation. And also, this kind of goes to the letters of support, which we'll talk about here in a minute. If you're a pro at coordination and cooperation and doing all these wonderful things, but your letters of support are from your colleagues in the adjoining counties to where you live, that's not reflective of what you're doing and how you're doing it. So, be mindful of what you've told us about your position and what you do and how you do it, and especially when you get here, and then be sure that's reflected all the way through, even to the letters of support, so that we get a good idea of who you are as a professional.
Yeah, and there's internal and external collaborators. And so, internally, it might be, work groups or things that you work on behalf of the agency or your district or your region. Externally, it may be program partners, funding partners, those kinds of things that you work with. But being able to provide some of that and give examples of how that partnership is helping you to be able to deliver your programming. And then the letters of support, I'm glad Andy mentioned that, because if you're telling us you're working with all these partners, right, and then we go to the letters of support and none of them are listed, that just that raises a little bit of a red flag. And I know not everybody writes the same quality of letter of support. So I'm going to speak to that because I think this is important. Ask for more than you need, okay? If it says 3, ask, and if you get 15, awesome, okay? Pick the best 3 that maybe are representative of the different groups that you work with. Other things, if there's really wonderful quotes in there that they put, you could put some of that under that coordination and cooperation, right? There may be some things like that you can include. The other thing is, I always like to give people, if they're doing letters on my behalf, a little bit of background so they're not having to start from ground zero. Don't think of that as cheating. Think of that as you're trying to help them to better frame their letter so that it will be supportive of what you do, because you're one of a million things they're probably having to do, and they are not as familiar with all the ins and outs of what you do as you are. So think about including that.
So before we move on this, I want to answer a question that's actually in the chat, and how you split between supportive extension activities and coordination and cooperation. Support, yes, that's more heavily limiting actual support to the agency, but coordination and cooperation, if you're coming in as a 1, this may start with 1 person in the community, and then it blossoms. And by the time you're a senior, you're networking with a variety of people. You're being asked to serve on a committee that may, yes, be in your discipline, but may not be part of extension. So for instance, you're in a professional association and they ask you to serve on a committee for whatever, nomination committee, whatever. This is part of your weaving in of your professional life with others in the community. So, lending support to another outside agency, anything like that. There are some great places that, yeah, it may overlap because of some of the things you're doing. I know mine do, but there may be some things that you're working on at a different level. And it's because you're over your time in your career, you've walked yourself into this as a leader.
So another thing to think about, and this is, I always think about Animal Farm, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. There are a lot of domains to this, and they're all important. But again, based on your position description, coordination and cooperation may be less important than program development implementation or outcome of programs or faculty staff training and assistance and things like that. And so, that, not to say that you can just take a 0 on this section or something, or poof it off. There needs to be something here, and it needs to be thoughtful, but let your work guide you as to how robust things appear in sections that are maybe not as important to your your position description. So again, please don't hear me to say that this is not important. You don't need to put something here. It is, and you do. But let your position description guide how robust that is.
Thank y'all very much. All good feedback and ideas. So the next section, the next performance domain is professionalism and service. I certainly hope you all know that it's very important that we all remain current, with our skills, with technology, our knowledge of certain subject matters, depending upon the program area that you serve in. And so that subject matter expertise is important, that we stay current. And so in the professionalism and service domain, we want you to show evidence of training that you maybe have completed, that you've participated in. Maybe it's professional organizations that you belong to, and then eventually leadership positions that you may hold within a professional organization that is applicable to your field. Publications or presentations that you do at those professional meetings. And then also in this section is work associated awards and honors that you might receive. And so it's important that we see that you're continuing. Earlier we talked about faculty, staff, and training, you providing that training for others, but it's also important that you show how you're staying current and getting training as well. So we want to see all of that here. So committee, you might have some tips and tricks for this section as well.
I think some of these things may also feed into some of the earlier sections. So like program development, implementation, and also the outcome of your programs. If you got a publication out of that, that needs to be something in the narrative in that section. That's an outcome of your program. If you received a Superior Service Award because of your support of county extension agents or because of the work you've done, that's an outcome of your program. So I know this was a discussion we had in the committee because not everybody does robust evaluation. And so, okay, I get that, but be creative about showing how your work has benefited you and the agency through outcomes and impacts. And some of that might be, you were invited to head a coalition, or you were given an award, or you got a publication or a presentation at a conference or something like that, and weave that kind of into some of the other sections where it makes sense.
I was just going to say ditto, because this is, especially that third bullet, you may do some evaluation outcome stuff, but if there was something that, over time you were able to put together, and this is looking at you at level 3 and senior, but you've been doing your programming now for over a decade, and you decided to write a Journal of an Extension article. This is, where you would definitely give us that takes it back to the first part. I mean, hopefully we're giving you just enough ideas that y'all will become really interested and then start bugging us all for questions and answers.
So then the next section is really additional responsibilities. I don't know that the career ladder guidelines gives any guidance on this section, with the exception of anything that does not fall within one of the previous 6 performance domains. So if you have something that you really want to make sure the committee knows about that doesn't fall with any of those other performance domains that we've gone through, then you could include a section on additional responsibilities. There may be something unique to your position and your position description that you want to be sure gets included here. And so this is where you could do that. I would definitely, I don't know, committee, y'all can chime in. I would recommend a conversation with somebody, maybe one of these committee members, like, I'm not seeing where this falls. You could have that conversation with your supervisor as well. I don't think it falls under one of these sections, and just kind of get their perspective too. I don't think we would want to see a really long section of additional responsibilities because it's likely that they fit somewhere else. But again, there may be some things that you do that don't fit. So does anybody else have something to add to that?
My comment is, like for me, I'm a part of an academic department. So I'm in the Department of Horticultural Sciences. So in that role as a departmental citizen, there's things that I do. One is I supervise several other program specialists under me. I also supervise student employees, so I put that down. If you're in a role where, like for me as in an academic department, I'm a guest lecturer for a couple of different undergraduate courses. I taught our freshman AGLS 125 course for the university. Your role may be very different from mine, but being an academic department, those are things that I could think of that maybe were outside of my normal scope of responsibility within extension, but it's things that I do that relate to maybe being a departmental employee and part of a larger, the larger A&M system.
Very good ideas and recommendations, Lisa. Does anybody
I would
else
echo that. Well, I would echo that about supervision. I supervise grant employees, and that ends up in an additional responsibility here. To Courtney's point, I would say if something is consistently ending up in additional responsibilities, then maybe you need to look back at your job description and see, where that goes, because if it is something that you're dedicating a significant amount of your time to, it probably needs to appear in your job description.
Okay, we're going to move on to, we just have a few more slides, but very important pieces of information. And one is just general recommendations for the promotion packet. I think the committee, based upon the packets that they've seen and just their experience, they have some recommendations that may or may not be specific to a performance domain, but just in general about the packet. So I'm going to turn it over to them to share any additional recommendations that they might have.
We've talked a lot about things, but just some things that may not be obvious, but maybe should be obvious. Your packet should be free of spelling and grammatical errors. If it says it's a 2-page limit, please don't exceed 2 pages, but please also don't go much under 2 pages. By not taking advantage of all the space that you have to sell yourself, which is basically what you're doing. I mean, you're selling yourself to your departmental committee, you're selling yourself to your department head, you're selling yourself to the agency committee, you're selling yourself to the director. If you get 2 pages to do a statement and you come in at 3/4 of a page, you've missed an opportunity to tell me something about you and about your work. And so please do take advantage of all the opportunities you have to sell yourself in the packet. I would recommend you have multiple eyes look on it, and those eyes don't just need to be in your department or in your unit. As we've pointed out repeatedly, the agency committee, and who knows, I mean, Lisa and Dean and Janet and I and some others were on it this year. We may not be on it next year, but you can expect that there will be a diverse array of professionals from across the agency that look at your material, and we're all going to focus on different things. So having many eyes look at your draft materials as you send them forward is going to be important. And then the last thing I would say before I let my colleagues share is, or not let them, I'm not letting them do anything before my colleagues jump in on this, is don't assume we know anything about you and your work. Not at all. And even if you've been up for promotion before, let's say you went from a 1 to 2 5 years ago and you're going from a 2 to 3 now, hopefully your work is different now. You have matured and you have advanced, and you are showing us that you're developing as a professional. And so even don't assume that we know what you do now just because we've seen your materials previously.
I want to speak to that just a little bit. It's helpful, I think, too, maybe to group the work that you've done since your last promotion. That really shows, I think, for me, growth of what you've done. Also, that, I mean, these things can get long and you're reading through lots of information. So tables are your friends, especially on program implementation, development and implementation. I mean, I know for me, I have, you know, the year, I have the title of the program, who the audience is, was it agents, was it volunteers, was it teachers, and then the scope, was it county, was it, you know, regional, was it state, was it international? I always, in most sections, like to have an introductory paragraph that kind of summarizes everything below, you know. So in that you could say, you know, detail below or the, you know, listing of program implementation and development that I've done. I've done this many programs since my last promotion. In total, I've done this many and reached X number of audience. Give a summary statement. That's, I have found that to be really, really helpful, and having others look at it. And if you know you're going up for the next level, find somebody that's already at that level that you can utilize their packet. A lot of people are willing to share that, and it just helps to be able to look at how it's formatted. Those of you in the 4-H world, it's like looking at somebody else's 4-H record book that they did, you know. I mean, it just helps. Not that your work is the same, but just how to lay it out and how to best tell your story. I think it can be really helpful.
Yeah, this is Dean. When I went through this process the last time, which was about 3 years ago, my mindset was, I want the committee to be in a good mood when they're looking at my packet. So I want to put them in a good mood. And how do you put them in a good mood is, you know, you try to have a nice, clean, well-organized packet so that the committee members don't have to do a lot of work when they're going through it. So it's really nice, you know, if you've got a table, for example, that lists a bunch of meetings, educational meetings or programs, you know, it really makes it easier on the committee, the people on the committee. If you've got a small table or a little paragraph or whatever above that breaks down and lists, you know, let's say you know, if you have 100 programs or meetings in a table dating back over, you know, 8 or 10 years, it's really nice and helpful if you point out that, hey, I did, you know, X, Y, Z of these since my last promotion. Because because the committee is only interested in what's happened since your last promotion. And if you're expecting the committee to go to all the effort to try to pull that out because you didn't, that's probably not a good idea, would be my advice.
Also, I would encourage you, I think particularly in this time, so much of our dissemination goes out through social media and websites. So be sure that you include that somewhere within that, okay? And it could be, you know, the number of likes, the number of downloads, you know, whatever that is, because that also is showing impact for sure, to be able to include that within your packet.
Yeah.
Very good.
Well, and follow the guidelines. Okay,
yeah.
Like we'll get some y'all that they don't even have the right performance domains. I mean, that sounds like crazy, but like if it lays it out in the performance domains, do it in that order, in the way it's listed, because it just, yeah, it makes it a whole lot easier, you know.
And if you haven't promoted since 2019, the formatting changed. So don't discount the amount of time it's going to take you to re-engineer your previous promotion efforts into the new format.
Boy, that is true.
Good point. Yes.
Ditto.
Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide, which is really our last slide that gives you a timeline of the promotion process. And I know we're in the lunch hour, but this is so important for us to spend a few minutes on so that you understand what is the process for promotion. This is also outlined month by month on page 2 of the guidelines for Career Ladder. So in this document, if you go to page 2, it starts the timeline of the promotion process. So it's a bit more specific, but the major parts of the process is, number 1, that you express your intent to your supervisor to apply for promotion. Now, I certainly hope that this is discussed annually during your performance review. Are you on the trajectory? Are you on the right path for promotion when that time becomes available? You know, are you meeting the expectations annually of your performance based upon that position description, et cetera? And so hopefully that's an annual conversation, but and so your supervisor, your ADH program leader might share a very specific deadline by which they want you to say, yes, I plan to apply for promotion this year, or it may be a conversation. They all do it a little bit differently. But be sure that you have that conversation with your supervisor, that you're expressing your intent to apply for promotion. So if you plan to apply this year, then you need to be having those conversations now with your supervisor if you haven't yet, and ask them, is there a deadline by which I need to tell you that I plan to apply? And so when all that takes place, Lisa mentioned the letters of support earlier, but you need to have 4 letters of support, and your supervisor, that ADH or program leader, is the one that should request those. Now, they may ask you to say, who should we request these letters from? And so they'll rely on you to identify those individuals, but they can be from agents, specialists, clientele, researchers, staff, partners, collaborators, like Lisa mentioned earlier, that should be reflective feedback in those letters that reflects and matches up with what you say you're doing and who you say you're working with in your achievement report. And so it's good that they share the work that you've done, the impact, and how they've worked with you as a program specialist. And so again, the recommendation is to ask for more than 4 and use the best ones. So if you plan to apply for promotion this year, go ahead and be thinking about who could you add to your list to request a letter from, but your supervisor should be the one requesting those letters of support. And then you want to prepare your documents for promotion packet. Again, if you have not started on your achievement report, or as Andy mentioned, if you have not promoted since before 2019, you definitely need to take a look at the guidelines because they are a bit different, but you'll want to start working on that achievement report or adding to that achievement report, getting it in a good place, having people review it. And you also want to pull together some representative samples of your work. And so you will submit that as well with your achievement report when you officially apply for promotion. The unit peer review committee is the only group really that looks at those representative samples of work. They don't go on to the agency peer review committee and to the director, just as a side note. That's stated in the guidelines. So you should have a deadline then by when you officially submit your promotion packet. So your supervisor should provide that to you to let you know the deadline for doing that. And so what our recommendation is that the unit peer review committee that the ADH or program leader assembles, that they provide you with some informal feedback and let you maybe make some changes to your promotion packet to strengthen it, to fine tune it. And then they go through a process of officially reviewing and voting on that to whether they recommend to the ADH or program leader if you recommend you for promotion. So they also create an evaluative statement, and that's what they send along with their committee vote to the unit head. And then the unit head adds a letter, again, another evaluative statement, and they submit that to the director. So all of this takes place over really probably a couple months' time. And so when I was program leader for 4-H, I always had a very early September deadline. So the unit peer review committee could review, provide feedback. They could work with that candidate if needed to recommend changes. And then they reviewed it one more time, voted on it, provided that evaluative statement, and then gave that to me for my review and recommendation. So then that's when the unit head creates that letter and sends a recommendation to the director with your packet. So with your achievement report. And that is due to the director by this year, by November 18th is the deadline. And so that's not necessarily a deadline for you as an extension program specialist, although it's good for you to know. It's a deadline for unit heads to submit the packet to the director's office. And then the agency peer review committee reviews those and makes a recommendation to the director for approval. Then the director reviews those recommendations and packets and then makes that final decision. And that decision is you're usually notified in March. Sometimes it might be a little bit later, but we try to aim for March that you're notified. I know just a couple of weeks ago, those that applied in this last round were notified of their promotion, but the promotion does not take place or go into effect until September 1 of the next year. So you can see this is like a year or more than a year-long process. And there is information in the guidelines about appealing a negative promotion decision. We won't get into all those today, but that is in there if you're interested in reading through that process. So if I missed anything or confused anything, y'all let me know, or committee members chime in. And we are then also going to go to questions. So I'm going to stop sharing this presentation just so I can see the chat, and we'll work through questions before we close out for the day.
May I make a comment quickly? I know this is about individuals wanting to go up for promotion, but many of you, especially if you are a more senior level in your unit or department, you may be asked to serve on a unit committee. You will be among the only people to look at the representative samples of work. Like Courtney said, you're probably the closest to your colleague who's seeking advancement. Please don't make your letter read like you're recopying their driver's license. Use your letter to really advocate for your colleague, to draw the unit head and the agency committee and the director's eye to really sound things that he or she has done, to accomplishments. Use that letter to help us understand the quality of the representative samples of work that you saw. That's really key. And to Dean's point about making it easy for subsequent reviews, you may be the first opportunity to start that making it easy path, because it really is about advocacy for your colleague. And that may include telling them hard truths about their materials to improve them. And don't be afraid of that. It's not about being punitive. It's not about anything other than constructive feedback, constructive criticism to help them be successful. So if you're asked to be on one of those committees, do take it seriously and do try to do good justice by your colleague.
Dottie had a question about examples of representative samples of work. And I'll just talk about some things that I included from mine. I had some samples from our junior master gardener curricula, like our, different curricula pieces. I had URLs from websites that we created to go with the program. I had sample grant report reviews that I submitted to granting agencies that gave us money. It could be state impact or outcome reports that you did that maybe were more detailed than you would put in your entire, achievement packet. Some of you may have done videos, online training courses, those kinds of things, and having them be able to see that and the quality of those, they take a lot of time to put together. And so if your departmental committee can see those and be able to comment on the quality of them, that would be really helpful.
Since we've got a second, so Emmy asked a question early on about, are there minimum numbers that you're looking for with program development and impact and implementation and outcome of programs? No, there are no minimums. Again, just to reiterate, we all do very different things in very different ways. But the example I gave is if you're in a statewide position working across multi-counties, then we're going to expect to see statewide implementation of something, or you've told us that you're in a statewide position and you should be working in all 250 counties, but you're doing a very strong researched, or you're trying to do some kind of evidence-based intervention and it only reaches 11 people in one place. Okay, we get that. But, use the narrative section to help guide us. The other example I use, if you're assigned to Loving County and there are 170 people there and you're reaching, half of them, well, then that's great too. So it can just be very different, but this is where helping us understand your work and how you do it is key.
Definitely. I've scrolled through the questions and I think our committee members answered them, or you've addressed them here a moment ago. So we'll see if I missed one. You can, if you don't feel like your question's been answered, chime in, or what other questions anyone might have.
I'll have one other comment. Don't be intimidated by this. It is a process, and so it does take work on your part, but the reward is quite good. I mean, it's the salary increase. If you're hung up on titles, you get to add another Roman numeral behind your title and that kind of thing. So, there is significant things at the end of this process. But to Courtney's point, it's about a 16-month process. And so if you don't start now, you are looking at 2024, to get a bump in your salary and an extra Roman numeral and that kind of thing. And so don't let any of this intimidate you. Talk to your department head if he or she thinks that you're ready. Talk to your colleagues if they think you're ready. Just do it. Lisa made the point in the thing that this is about helping each other. It's not about trying to intimidate you. Now, don't get me wrong. If the work's not there, the work's not there. And don't be put off if your department head tells you that. Use that as something instructive for how you can be ready for next cycle. But if the work is there and if you meet the other requirements, go for it.
Well, and Beth asked a question about, are you expected to go up every 5 years? I mean, that's really up to you. I think it's when you feel like you are ready. There's some guidelines on how often, right? You have to have that 5-year period of time in between it. But you may be like, I just don't feel like I'm ready at this point. And that's okay. It's not necessarily that, okay, I have to do this. And some of you may be limited on your degree, for instance, on being able to go up any further. There are some specific guidelines in there related to some of that. So just take a look at it and, see what those are.
Somebody asked a question about, let's see, if you work in other positions like an agent, do you include? Yes, I wouldn't. I mean, you would leave. I mean, presumably all that would be in your CV or in your packet already. Yeah, I would leave it there if it was me. I mean, we're probably not, the committee probably wouldn't use that and looking at your packet whenever you go through the process, but personally I would leave it there.
Yeah, it's a cumulative effort. So I think it's okay to show that. And then the top part is going to be, this is the stuff that I've done, since my last promotion. But, Jerry
Yeah,
Lynn,
emphasizing
Jerry,
since you're in your new role, what's happened, but sure.
I think it's good. I've worked as an agent. I've done this and then I've done that. I think it's good to include that, but just differentiate maybe the part that's, the newest part.
Laura mentioned the I think we'll start another monthly work group as 4-H unit again this fall. I think I know that Healthy South Texas does this as well. I think I know that. I may be making that up. But that is a good idea. And it shows like peer mentorship and peer leadership in your unit, where they get together and they work on sections based on previous successful packets that have gone forward, but also the collective knowledge and memory of what the group has done together and how they've done it. That can be a good way to do that. I will say, with that in mind, the committee this year did provide feedback to successful candidates. Previously, we only, if you were successful, you were just successful. There was no real feedback given. And so what you saw from that is sometimes the one successful packet led to 3 other packets after it, but may have repeated some of the mistakes we noticed or some of the areas for improvement in that successful packet. So if your department had somebody that went up and they were successful this year, they will be getting feedback. I would say if you use them as an example to pay attention to that feedback, because it's only going to make your package stronger as well.
Jerry Lynn asked the question about having someone outside your unit review your packet. I think that's absolutely critical. You may be in a unit that there's not many other extension program specialists. And I know that most of us on this committee this time also served on unit committees. Okay. And so, I'm in horticulture, but I may have served on a committee for family and community health or Healthy South Texas or 4-H and youth development. And it always helps having somebody outside that unit to give some feedback in the process. And if you're in a unit that there's not many other extension program specialists, reach out to a unit that has some, right? And say, hey, do y'all have somebody that would be willing to review my packet, right? I think that's helpful. When I first started, the people that were reviewing ours had a lot of academic appointments, right, in the department. And sometimes their feedback of my packet was not as helpful because their expectations for their promotion and tenure packet was extremely different than what mine was.
But that might provide the perspective of, having that external reviewer, Jerry Lynn. I don't know what this means. Earlier the example of using WAT for Walk Across Texas was given, but there may be a 4-H program or just something. What is a leadership lab? I have no idea what that is. And so having them give feedback on what they understood, because the committee is made up of a variety of people throughout the agency. So I think that's a great idea, would provide good perspective. I want to thank Lisa, Andy, Dean, and Janet, because I think the feedback that they've given, I hope, is probably the most beneficial part of this training. We can read the guidelines and tell you what, is supposed to be in there. But when you start hearing feedback from them who have dug through packets and wish they maybe would have seen something differently or really liked it this way, and what provided the most clarity for them, I think that's the information that is so important as you prepare for promotion, to apply for promotion. And so I just thank all of you for taking the time to be a part of the training today and providing that great insight. It's been very helpful. And I don't want to speak for any of them, but I think if you had some questions or you needed their perspective on something, you could call them or email them, and they would be more than happy to help answer your question.
We've been there. It's an extension family. I put that in there, however we can help. We want to be able to, to do that.
Yes. So with that, we'll close out today's training and just thank you all for taking the time to be a part of the training today. And hopefully you learned more about the process and feel better prepared. But we know that you have a lot of work ahead, but we thank you for all that you do and look forward to having you apply for promotion or encouraging others to do so. And so again, as I said, this will be recorded and we'll get it posted and share that once it becomes available. So thank you all so much. Y'all have a great Friday and a good weekend.